If you've ever been concerned that you're not good looking enough or that you have some abnormality or something about your appearance that's not good enough or that's turning people off and you feel kind of ashamed and inadequate because of that, then you're going to love this amazing story. A woman was referred to me who had a very interesting background, but her complaint was intense anxiety. She'd become housebound because she developed the sudden belief that there was an ugly scar on her nose that made her look disfigured and grotesque, like a monster. And that's all there is to the diagnosis of body dysmorphic disorder is you focus on some aspect of your appearance that you're convinced is just horrible and that other people can't see it. And their attempts to reassure you are absolutely, totally ineffective and just makes you worse. Well, this was a woman who went to MIT for graduate work and did, electrical engineering. The cool thing, she was the top person in her class at MIT. And when she graduated with her PhD, Intel snapped her up, put her in chip design to develop a new, faster chip for computers. And she was kind of a prodigy, and she came up with a chip that became the most popular chip. And I don't remember the name of it, but 20 years ago or 30 years ago, it took the world by storm. And so the chip she designed made billions of dollars for Intel, and they paid her bonuses and rewarded her royally. And she was also a very beautiful woman, and decided that she wanted to take a little leave of absence because she had all of this money, and focus more on her social life for a while, and let the rest of her life develop. And so she took a leave from Intel, and she met a very a wonderful man who was teaching at Foothill College and teaching English, and they fell madly in love and got married. Fast forward about 5 years, she and her husband are happily married, and they have twin girls who are 3 or 4 years old. And one night after dinner, they're talking, and they had always thought, like, after a break, she might go back and resume her career. And once the girls were, old enough and they got to talking, maybe this would be a good time to go back and, pick up where she'd left off. And then she went into the kitchen to do the dishes after dinner, to clean up or something, and there was a small earthquake. And a piece of the ceiling, she looked up and it fell on her face and put a deep gash in her nose, which started bleeding profusely, the outside of her nose. And so they panicked, and her husband put a towel on it, put pressure on it, and they drove at high speed to the Stanford emergency room, where they brought in a plastic surgeon who put in like some large number of tiny sutures, I think 40, because he said that we put in lots of tiny sutures, it will heal up without a scar. And then after a few weeks, it did heal up and left no scar. But she became convinced that it did leave a scar, and she developed what's called body dysmorphic disorder, that she suddenly thought she was grotesque, and that she looked like a monster, and that if anyone saw her nose, they would get upset or nauseated or vomit or just like think she was terrible. And she got so frightened that she was afraid even to leave her house. And she became housebound, which is called agoraphobia, when you're afraid to leave home. And so she was very, very desperate, and she and her husband knew that something was extremely wrong. So they brought her back to the psychiatric clinic to see if she could get some help with her her agoraphobia. In working with her, I always ask a person, what are you thinking? And one of her thoughts is this ugly scar spoils my face, spoils my appearance. And another thought was, if anyone sees me, they'll be grossed out and disgusted, and thoughts like that. Now, when I work to change the way people think. And so I tried a tremendous amount of techniques to help her see that this wasn't really true. Now, body dysmorphic disorder is considered one of the most difficult anxiety disorders, possibly the most. And many people have said, experts have said, there's no form of psychotherapy that can help these people. At least at that time, they were saying that. And there's no medications that offer any hope either. And what typically happens is that the loved ones try to tell the person, no, your nose is fine, or whatever delusion they have about their body, which actually makes them worse because they feel like no one's understanding them, and they get into arguments, and it just intensifies the anxiety and the anger and the frustration and the inadequacy and the loneliness. So when I work with someone, I take one of their thoughts and I put it in what's called a recovery circle. And the thought in the recovery circle is, this ugly scar spoils my face. And then I have arrows coming out of that circle, and each arrow represents a technique that might help her challenge and crush that thought. And I have learned about 140, 150 of these techniques, which we're now training or feeling great amped to use these techniques as well. And my philosophy is to fail as fast as I can, and with the patient, because the faster we fail with techniques on that recovery circle, the quicker we'll get to the one that works. And so I had a recovery circle that I worked out with her. I showed her the list of techniques, and we selected, I think, probably about 20 techniques, more than 20, that might help her see through this thought. And we tried technique after technique after technique, failed and failed and failed. So like I did things like saying, let's call her Helen. Helen, you say you believe that if you went outside and people saw your face, they would become, disgusted and upset. Let's do a technique called examine the evidence, because you were a top scientist at MIT, so you know about experiments and examining evidence. And so tell me, when you go outside, when you've been outside, have people looked at you in disgust? Do women cover their children's eyes and say, don't look at this grotesque woman? How did you come to this conclusion that people think you're ugly? And then she said, well, obviously, they don't say things like that, but I know that's what they're thinking. That technique failed. And I said, well, how about your husband? Does he tell you that you've become ugly and that your nose is abnormal? And she says, well, no, he just tries to cheer me up, but I'm sure he's just saying what he thinks help me, and I don't believe what he's saying. And then I tried the hidden emotion technique. That's a killer technique that I've developed, and it's kind of based on psychodynamic therapy, but for anxiety it's really cool, and it's based on the idea that when people are anxious, there's often some problem in their life they're not attending to. And I want you to think right now, what could be bugging Helen? Why did this come on? What are her symptoms trying to say? Because, it's keeping her from going outside. It's keeping her from pursuing her career. And so I would ask you to do a guessing game right now. But just to simplify it, I'll tell you a lot of the theories that I explored with her occurred to me. You see, they've been rolling in dough with all this money she got from Intel, and driving, Ferrari sports car and a fantastic home in Silicon Valley and all of that. And could it be now that maybe the money's running out and now her husband is pushing her to go back to work to get another job and make a bunch of money again? And how many of you think that might have been going on? Put your hands up if you think that's the hidden emotion. Yeah, okay. I see a lot of hands going up. But I proposed that to her, and she said, "No, that's absolutely not true." And and then I got another one. Here's what it is. She's not ready yet to let go of her children, like to go and have a job because she wants to be a mother for a longer period of time. She's not ready yet to go back to her career, but she doesn't feel like she's allowed to say that because she's such a nice person, because nice people are the only ones who get anxiety for the most part. And that niceness causes you to push your feelings under the surface, and then they resurface as something like a phobia, or in her case, the delusion that her nose was grotesque and ugly. And again, you see, it keeps her home, right, with her children. So how many of you think that might have been the hidden? Yes, I see a bunch of hands going up again, and I proposed this to her. She said, absolutely, no, doesn't resonate at all. And I went through a lot of hidden emotions, and she was one person that technique absolutely was not worthless, and it was worthless. It just didn't help. And I did, identify the distortions, explain the distortions, the downward arrow technique. And we tried about 5 techniques every session for 3 or 4 sessions, and her anxiety didn't improve, nothing improved. And I told her, Helen, you told me that you'd be willing to do anything if I accepted you as my patient. And I'm going to have to call you on that now, because I want you this week to come and see me for 3 days in a row rather than once a week. And I'm going to give you an assignment to do between each session. And it's going to scare the wits out of you. But you have to do what I'm asking you to do. Now, my office, the Stanford Behavioral Sciences, is right next to the Stanford Shopping Center. So I said, today, the first experiment I want you to do is, after the session, I want you to walk over to the Stanford Shopping Center, and you can leave the makeup. She tried to cover this non-existent scar with heavy makeup. You can leave your makeup on, but I want you to go over to the Stanford Shopping Center and do what I call a smile and hello practice. I want you to smile and look at 20 strangers in the eye and say, "Hi, how are you doing? Good to see you." And look right in their face, so they'll be looking right in your face, and then you can keep track on a 3x5 card how they react, whether they react positively and smile back and seem friendly, or neutral, you can't figure it out, or negatively, like they seem shocked when they see your face. And she didn't want to do it. And do you think that means it's a good idea or a bad idea? How many of you think it's a bad idea? Okay, how many of you think it's a good idea? Yes, that's right. If the patient is afraid of the exposure, that means you're on the right track. So I said, the fact that you're scared, that's the proof that you need to do this. And then tomorrow, come back and give me the results of your experiment. And so she was scared but courageous, and she came back on the next day on Wednesday. And she had approached 20, smiled and said hello to 20 strangers. And she said 17 of them reacted in a tremendously friendly way. And 3 of them were neutral. They didn't realize she was talking to them. They thought she was maybe talking to someone else or something like that. And there were no negatives. And I said, Well, how do you reconcile that with your belief, Helen? You're a scientist, that if anyone looks at your face, they'll vomit and get grossed out and disgusted. And she said, "Well, I can't exactly reconcile it." And I said, "How much do you now believe uh, this? And how are you feeling now? How much do you believe this ugly scar ruins my face?" And she says, "My belief went from 100 to 50. I don't believe it as much as before, and I'm feeling a lot less anxious." Now, my question for you is, why didn't it go to 0? And what should she do next? Try to figure it out for a minute, and then I'll give you the answer. Why all these people were looking at her and smiling? Why didn't that completely obliterate her belief? Well, the answer was, she said, I said, "How do you explain the fact that no one was grossed out?" And she says, "I think because they couldn't see the scar because of the makeup." Now, what's her assignment for the next day? That's right. You got it. I said, "Okay, this was now on Wednesday." I said, "Now today I want you to repeat it, but I want you to wash your face in the restroom and get all of that makeup off of your nose and go and repeat it." And so again, she was terrified, and then came back on Thursday. She went and did her experiment, and she came back, and this time 18 people were friendly, 2 were neutral, and there were again no negatives. And I said, now, how much do you believe that thought, Helen? And she said, "It's 0. I don't believe it anymore." And I said, "How are you feeling?" And she said, I'm just feeling terrific." And I said, "Okay." She said, "Maybe I'm done now with the therapy." I said, No, we have to do a few more things here, because you were afraid of making a fool of yourself, because of your nose. And we have what's called a high-level solution and a low-level solution. In a low-level solution, you find happiness because you realize your fears were not founded and that your negative thoughts were farces. They were frauds. You were telling yourself things that weren't true. When you see the truth, that people love you, they aren't disgusted. They don't hate you. That's a high. But, sometimes people do get judgmental. And so what I want you to do for the third experiment today is I want you to go home and put on some outrageous costume, and then go back and do it again in the Stanford Mall. Walk up and say hello to people, and smile and talk to them, actually. But wear some. Do you have anything outrageous that you could wear? So you'll make a fool of yourself, is what I want you to do. And she said, "Well, when I was a younger, I went to the New Orleans Mardi Gras, and I had one of those big, huge hats." And she said, "And then I have these silver sequined spiked high heel shoes, and I can wear a real racy red dress, and then this bizarre hat, and then I can go back to the mall and smile and say hello to 20 strangers." I said, Go for it. I'm so damn proud of you. And then when we get together next Tuesday, you could tell me what happened." And she came back the next Tuesday and said she was like really shocked, because she tried as hard as she could seem to make a fool of herself. And she said this time she got 20 positives. Everyone just seemed delighted that she was talking to them. And then what was really cool, she says, I ran into one of my understudies there on the chip development team. I recognized him, and he said, "Oh, Helen, we've been missing you like crazy, because the AMD chip company's catching up with us." And we were just saying, yesterday, would it be great if Helen could come back and lead our team again? And she said, well, that's so interesting because I've been working on a new concept for a quantum computer. And, I'd just be delighted to come back and work with all of you again. And he said, well, go to, go to the PR department and they'll make you an offer you can't refuse. And so she came back and she was just totally on a high. And she said, I think I'm really, I'm really cured now, and I can't thank you enough, Dr. Burns. God bless you. And I said, well, Helen, you're not ready yet, because you still might think that the world is going to come to an end if you make a fool of yourself or you're not perfect. So this can be your last session, but I want to do something called the feared fantasy, and we'll go together to the Stanford Mall from hell. And in this mall, there's two weird rules. One rule is if you think people are judging you, they really are. And not only that, they get right up in your face and they tell you the things you don't want to hear, like, what's that ugly scar on your nose? I'm nauseated. I'm about to vomit. How dare you go out in public? And you can have whatever role you want, Helen. And then we'll do role reversals, because the purpose of this is for you to see that if your worst fear came true, you actually wouldn't have anything to fear, because the other person would be the one who is looking foolish. So what role do you want first? So she said, well, I'll be the shopper from hell and you can play my role. So I said, that's cool. So say horrible things to me. Let's say you're in the mall, you're with your daughter, and walk up to me and tell me I have an ugly scar on my face. And so she said, okay, young lady, you have no right to be in this mall. You've got an ugly scar on your face, and it's making me nauseated. And sweetheart, don't look at that woman's awful face. I have to cover my daughter's eyes. And then I said, well, actually, I have a lot of flaws. The scar on my nose is just one of many. But you seem very worried about your daughter there, because I saw a man at the other side of the mall with who has an amputated leg. I mean, there's all kinds of people here with flaws. If your daughter's that sensitive, here's Dr. Burns's card. Maybe you want to go see him. His office is right across the street. And then she started laughing, and then we did a role reversal, and she began to see, or she absolutely totally saw, that the fool in that interaction would not be Helen, but these imaginary, cruel, perfectionistic people. And so that was the last interaction I ever had with her. But when we were doing that, we were not only changing her thoughts in the here and now, but changing her underlying belief that she had to be perfect and that people would only love her if she was perfect, in this case, physically perfect. So that's the story. And I hope you gained a little something from it. I hope you enjoyed it. And it's an absolutely true story, and I'll never forget her. I learned so much from her, and it was so great to see her getting back to joy. And I saw on 60 Minutes recently that the quantum computers are now coming into existence. So thank you, Helen, again. So that's all for now. And but if you're struggling with anxiety, or thinking you're not good looking enough, or you're too shy and don't know how to get a date, or something like that, you can check out our Feeling Great app, and you'll learn about not only these techniques, but many others you can use to help you change the way you think. And when you do, you'll change the way you feel. So that's it for today.